Okay, I would love to welcome back to my podcast, Deepa Kannan from Thrive. In case you missed it, I had Deepa on episode 5, I believe it was, where we were talking all about hormones. So I remember that was a really in-depth discussion with so much valuable information. So if anybody missed that one, please go back and check it out. But Deepa is an allied functional medicine practitioner and a functional nutritionist, and has recently sort of pivoted, or we're going to find out, but has directed a part of her attention to sleep, because it is such a massive issue all across the world with people not prioritizing it enough, and serious health concerns as a result. So I wanted to bring her back on to have a chat about sleep, because it's certainly something that I'm always talking to everybody I see pretty much about. So welcome back, Deepa. And I guess my first question for you is, why did you decide to specialise in sleep? And also, I guess, just how much of that is your practice at the moment? Is it, are you still kind of half and half, or is that taking over?
First of all, Arvind, it's a pleasure to be back. I loved our whole conversation as well. And yes, since then I pivoted to sleep. And why sleep? Because for the longest time, I think I prevented myself from choosing an area of focus, because I believe practicing functionally itself is such a specialization. But then I started to realize that finding something specific just does allow you to go a whole lot deeper into a subject. And I myself have struggled with so many sleep challenges pretty much my whole life, most of them probably triggered by levels of high stress. So there were periods when I was a child with certain autoimmune challenges that made me feel impacted with my sleep. And then, of course, there was a troublesome marriage, which did the same. Post my divorce and my subsequent marriage, my child, who was born with the adrenal disorder and having to keep running into the emergency room in that first year, that impacted my sleep. So I don't think I really slept until the last 3 to 4 years. I didn't even understand what was good sleep. And it's only after my own specialization, and let me just stop for a second, because I must clarify that although my public focus on sleep has been only in the last year, my actual focus into sleep has been for the last 4 years. And I've done a lot of work with clients specifically with sleep challenges, and put together sort of a system which helps to look deeper at sleep. And sleep is a very strange subject, Arvind, that if you start to focus in the area of sleep, you come across so many experts in sleep, but they're all looking through one lens. So it would be either that they're all looking through the lens of circadian rhythms and the science of it, and then there's CBTI, which is cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia. And I found that I'm going to be a bit controversial to say that I find that very a narrow approach, that it's not taking into account all that could be the reason for somebody sleeping poorly. So I wanted to go deeper into what are actually physiological root causes of poor sleep, which is what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And the sleep world, of course, is extremely, there are polarities in terms of research. And I also want to, before we head into the conversation itself, I must say that while I am someone who does peek into research, I think that if we get caught up in everything research, it does narrow our ability to look from a bigger bird's eye view. So I do bring research into my practice, but I think the evidence can also be a specific person, how they feel better. And I think we need to start paying attention to the person as evidence beyond just focusing always on the research. And I'm not saying that research is not important or that we should not feel validated if something comes out in research, but given the fact that 20 years back people probably thought yoga and meditation was a little bit of hoo-ha science, and only now suddenly there's a lot of research into these ancient practices and bringing focus into the science of what happens with them, I think we need to have a little bit of caution in that balance between research and just looking at the body's feedback.
I totally agree. I mean, yeah, I think in anything in functional or holistic health, then we need to be paying attention to the results. So a results-based approach is just as valid as a research-based approach, I believe. Yeah, good. So are you finding that sleep is the bulk of your practice now?
No, actually. So I think I'm fairly divided between women's health, detoxification, adrenal function, skin health, and sleep. But I think there's a lot of crossovers between some of these areas because the hormones impact sleep, sleep impacts hormones, adrenal function, sleep also have this bidirectional axis. So does liver health, detoxification. So I think somewhere they all do come together eventually. So maybe we begin by looking at women's health or sleep, but eventually we're looking at everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that is the approach of your work anyway, isn't it? To take that that view, that whole person view. So, okay, so you mentioned something just before about the root causes or the underlying causes of, I assume we're talking about poor sleep, which I'm sure you'll get into. So would you like to just tell us a bit about that? What do you see as the main causative problems for poor sleep?
Yes, absolutely, Arvin. And again, when it comes to root causes, even though I will talk about so many aspects, remember that there's a different permutation and combination of root causes based on the person, the age, the body constitution, the season, the level of stress, so much. But if we were to break down root causes into various areas, so I can begin by actually going through 10 basic areas which I talk about, and I would begin to talk about the circadian rhythm because this is something which is a bit controversial today. And in the sleep world, there are people who have these polar opposite views. So there's one set of views who talk about, and there's two aspects of these opposing views, and I'll talk about both of those in the context of circadian rhythm. So there's a subset of people who believe that the blue light from your screen is the biggest reason for sleep challenges today in our modern world because we're spending so much time being exposed to this artificial blue light. And then there's one view from Professor Michael Gradisa, who I interviewed recently, who did research into this and said that the concept of blue light is an absolute myth. So what exactly is true? So Michael did do this big research, and I went into a little bit of this with him, and I asked him, so does the content of what you're watching then play a role? And he said that if the bedtime remains the same and your eyes are exposed to blue light, you actually don't feel the impact on sleep. However, I must say that we need to bring a little caution into this sort of a view because it does impact a lot of people based on several other root causes. So I think minimizing our exposure to blue light in the evening should be part of sleep hygiene, because there is enough research to also show the opposite view, that blue light exposure does forget sleep, even if it's not technically looking at whether it's destroying your sleep. The exposure to blue light is also linked to endocrine dysfunction and several other challenges, which then become root causes of poor sleep.
Right.
And in terms of circadian rhythm, there's also two opposing views, because there's recently a book written by Michael Bruce, who's considered the sleep doctor, and he's very popular, and he's written about these different chronotypes, sleep chronotypes, who some people are meant to go to bed in midnight and sleep only 6 hours. Some people are meant to sleep earlier in the evening and have longer sleep. And this is also a little controversial, because I've spoken to so many experts in the sleep world about this. And I personally believe that the concept of this chronotype, who's a night owl, who they say genetically is predisposed to sleeping at midnight, and that's their pattern. Personally, I feel that there's some physiological root causes which are predisposing them to even be that night owl. So
Yeah.
I personally don't believe that. Neither does any Ayurvedic expert I've spoken to has agreed with me that this is not really normal, and it does represent adrenal dysfunction. It does point towards various aspects going on already, which is predisposing you to have that unnatural circadian rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
So I would bring some caution into that for sure. But of course, there is a lot of people. I mean, I do believe that genetics can predispose a small section of the population to be that night owl.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are to base this diagnosis of a person by taking an online quiz and categorizing them as a night owl, and telling them that going to bed at midnight is the right approach for them, I'm a bit cautious with that for sure.
Yeah.
So the first root cause I would look at is always, is there unnatural circadian rhythm, or is there unnatural exposure to blue light? For example, I would think that being on your screen for 18 hours of the day, having your backlight on at the fullest level would definitely be impactful. So that does need to be looked at.
Mm-hmm.
The second root cause category which I would go into is just adrenal function, because adrenal function plays such a big role with sleep, and cortisol is meant to be highest when you wake up, and then slowly start to lower at noon, go down by the evening, and then be at its lowest point when you go to bed. And oftentimes when you have these night owls, these chronotypes, they will tell you that they're exhausted in the morning. They need coffee to get them started. But then when they go to bed at night, however tired they are, they suddenly find that their mind is on high alert. They're thinking 100 different thoughts. They're not able to wind down. And so this unnatural adrenal rhythm can also be a reason for sleep. And why does adrenal function become so challenged? The highest reason, of course, is the amount of stress that we throw at ourselves, because when cortisol is raised, after a while it just gets a little fed up, and then there's a phase where you'll find that you're on this high cortisol phase. So you're always you feel like a buzz and a high adrenaline, but eventually you feel defeated. No amount of sleep seems to make you recover. So I think adrenal function would definitely be another big part of the sleep puzzle. So looking at whether someone is stressing the adrenal with high levels of stress. And I'll tell you, Arvind, I would probably put this at the top of the sleep root causes, because I've seen people who've done all the other work on diet and lifestyle, exercise, they have everything in place, and then they have this episode of high stress, a state of emergency where someone's asked for a divorce, or someone's having a very bad argument with their parent, and then that tips them into the state of poor sleep, which goes on for the next month, and sometimes they're unable to recover that balance for quite some time. So I would really put stress at the highest, and I don't think we give it still the importance that it deserves, because you see people who have excellent dietary habits and exercise, and they still, if they have this unresolved aspect of stress where they don't bring in practices to actually help them calm down, then it does impact them. So adrenal function would be the second reason that I would say that there is issues with sleep. And of course, you asked me about brain health. I think we was chatting behind the scenes, so I would definitely put brain health also there. And I don't know if your audience is aware of the glymphatic system in the brain, which actually the research has only come out recently, that the brain has its own waste disposal system in the form of the glymphatic system. But this is a system that was spoken about in Ayurveda so long ago, but again we needed that research for people to actually pay attention and start talking about it. And this is exactly what I mean about that balance in research versus ancient wisdom, because there's so much, I mean, you cannot discount ancient wisdom which is passed on through lineages and texts just because there's no scientific research to validate that. So the glymphatic system actually requires deep sleep for it to release the metabolic waste of the brain's function all through the day. And you'll find that people who have tendency towards sinus congestion, migraine headaches, depression, if they'll actually struggle to sleep, because when they go to bed, and then that's the time that, because this release of metabolic waste in the brain is happening in deep sleep, sometimes it will feel as if they're getting more congested. So they'll wake up and they'll actually feel that they're stuffy. They start breathing through the mouth. And of course, there's so much to go into nasal breathing versus mouth breathing in the world of sleep, because you need to breathe through your nose to increase nitric oxide. If you breathe through your mouth, you're triggering a sympathetic dominant phase, which is high alert, again, hyperadrenal function. So you need nose breathing to shift you into a parasympathetic state where you're able to wind down, calm down. So I think the health of the brain is really key to good sleep as well, because without you realizing, you could shift into this mouth breathing pattern at night if you have the tendency for this glymphatic system to get congested. And that can be due to omega-3 deficiency. It can be lack of adequate circulation. There's so much going on with the brain. There's so much focus on the brain's health. So I think, again, in terms of brain health itself, every person has so many aspects to that. So brain health would be a third. And then I would talk about also the nature of your relationships, because I do believe that having been in a stressful relationship and having my sleep totally thrown apart, that if someone doesn't have nurturing qualitative relationship, or even if they don't have that, if they are in a relationship which is very, very stressful, constant abuse, physical or emotional, constantly being stressed out, then definitely then there is that again that spike in cortisol, which starts to again feed into that adrenal dysfunction, which then impacts sleep as well. And of course, we can't not talk about diet, because our food is so much a part of sleep that probably we should spend a little time talking about dietary aspects, because personally, my mantra for sleep in terms of diet is that the best sleep plate begins at breakfast. It's not about, there's a lot of talk in the sleep world about how you need to have dinner, which has certain specific nutrients, tryptophan, that's all fine, but we cannot undo the metabolic chaos that we've triggered with a bad breakfast by just eating a fairly decent dinner, and it's not going to help you sleep. So the right sleep plate truly begins at breakfast. And if you start your day with the optimal protein, very low sugars, or keeping sugars to healthy carbohydrates in the form of fiber and healthy fats, then also the whole day goes by without you actually craving, without your blood sugar being chaotic. And therefore, by the time you get to dinner, you could be having a lighter dinner and it's still going to work for you. But again, I must say that this is very bio-individual, because if somebody is struggling with adrenal issues and blood sugar issues, maybe a light dinner won't work for them. Maybe that's the time they need some healthy carbohydrates like sweet potatoes, which have tryptophan, which can convert to serotonin and melatonin to help with sleep. But I think diet plays a very key role in all of this, and the root of all of that, of course, goes back to how is your blood sugar behaving. So is your diet helping your blood sugar to be stable, or is it creating that chaos? And remember, everyone's blood sugar is so different. People struggling with poor sleep definitely have volatile blood sugar balance, and so it should begin with a diet that's really helpful to support that. And then, of course, are they having optimal exercise? Because you know that exercise is a tricky thing when you have poor sleep. If you're somebody who's busy all day long, and then you go for your workout in a gymnasium with these bright lights and loud music at 8 p.m., you're not going to be able to fall asleep, because not only are you impacting your circadian rhythm, the sound is disturbing to adrenal function. That exercise does trigger a spike in endorphins, which you need some time for that to drop in order to help you sleep. So time of the day matters for exercise, but also it's the nature of exercise. Is it too heavy? Is it too light? Are you too sedentary? Are you too active? And all of this is really a Goldilocks amount based on the person itself, because if you're not at all exercising, then that can be impactful to sleep as well. But if you're over-exercising, overtraining, especially women who are running marathons all the time and doing heavy workouts, then that can affect adrenal function. It can also lower progesterone, and then progesterone is quite helpful to calming down. So then that can impact sleep. And of course, we have to look at hormones. So if you look at hormones, there's so much to that as well. As I said, estrogen dominance, which can trigger hot flashes in the night, wake you up. So you may be able to fall asleep, but maybe you're not able to last with your sleep. And it's a common thing that you see in premenopausal women, where they say they go to bed, they can fall asleep, but then they don't sustain it for more than 5 or 6 hours. And then they're awake and they're struggling to go back to sleep. So if you look at hormones, there's just so much in that, but we can talk about how much ever you want to. And then, of course, there's thyroid health. There's how are you managing temperature? Are you too cold, too hot? Because typically the science shows that in order to fall asleep, you need your body temperature to be a bit lower. If you've got a higher body temperature, you can't quite fall asleep. But then that body temperature is again based on the individual, the sex, the hormones, the season, the time of the day, time of the menstrual cycle. So really we need to be able to piece apart, and we can go into all of this in as much detail as you'd like to.
That was the 10 things that you look at, yeah? You got all of them. I didn't write them all down, so I don't know if there was 10 in total, but I'm sure there was. Yeah, I mean, that actual example that you just gave about someone who can fall asleep but then wakes in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep was one that I did definitely want to cover with you, because it's certainly a really common one that I come across, as well as also obviously people who struggle to fall asleep, and then also people who don't feel refreshed when they wake up in the morning. But perhaps if we consider first of all the waking in the middle of the night scenario and not being able to get back to sleep, what are some, and I, yes, totally hear what you're saying, that this is all very individual as to what is going to work and what the underlying problem is for each individual person. But in general, in that scenario, so you mentioned that it can certainly be a hormonal issue, especially for women, but what other things would you consider, and how would you go about actually trying to start to help somebody in that scenario?
Perfect. So I think that if, of course, lights have a big role to play. We spoke about that before, but people who are sensitive to sleep maintenance, which is that they can't last with sleep for a long time, they can be deeply sensitive to light. So checking that whether you do a light audit of your bedroom and just check where are the light sources. And I must share, Arvind, that there was a small spot of light on the switchboard of my bedroom, and it would be extremely disturbing to me, so much so that when I would ask my husband to cover it with a black tape, and he would say, "Aren't you being fussy?" But I know that this does impact different people differently. So if you're very sensitive to light, it can be impactful. So what I found is, for people who struggle with sleep maintenance, either they need to cover up their eyes with an eye mask throughout their sleep. But then there's also research coming out that these cells that sense light and trigger change in hormones based on night or days are also found in your toes, that if your toes are exposed to light, you're still going to upset that circadian rhythm. So you need to cover yourself up. Yes, there is research coming that people wear eye masks. Is that enough? But you'll find that if they're lying there without a cover on themselves and there's light near the foot of their bed, that can impact their sleep. So one of the ways to get around that is, I don't know if you've seen the red bulb. So if you switch your nighttime bulb to a red one, which is, if you can't be in a dark room, it's good to that shift in the red light will actually prevent that. But I would say if someone is really sensitive to staying asleep, it's best to clean out the room of all lights, shut the door, black out curtains, and see that there's pitch darkness if you can manage that. And of course, there are other aspects of this, because some people say that they don't quite feel safe in a very dark room. That goes back to traumatic experiences. What have they been through? Why is it impacting them in that way? So there's a lot to that trauma aspect as well. So one is lighting. So you must make sure, because if you wake up at some time in the night and you watch, and then again, when there is the habit that people who are really healthy in terms of food, they're still waking up in the night, taking their phone, opening social media and scrolling through it. I mean, if that's the kind of a habit that's going on, then it's not going to really be helpful, because the moment your eyes see that light, it's stimulating wake up. So your brain actually doesn't know the difference between natural light and a light source. So therefore, it will start triggering the cascade of hormones for wake up, including cortisol spike, and then you're going to be alert. You don't want that. So I would think that putting your phone in airplane mode and putting it away where you have no access to it for about 8 to 10 hours should be something that everybody does as part of their life if they want to improve their sleep. So that's step one. The second aspect is, of course, blood sugar balance and adrenal function. So if they're eating in a way where blood sugar is fluctuating a lot, and this can also happen if they are pre-diabetic, or if they are insulin resistant where the blood sugar is already elevated, then what's going to happen is that if they go to sleep and then they've eaten something throughout the day which is spiking blood sugar, which continues into the dinner, then what's going to happen is somewhere in between their sleep and that blood sugar starts to go down, it's going to create a cortisol spike, because the body thinks that there's a state of emergency, and therefore it will wake you up because of the blood sugar drop. So it's very important to see that they're eating in a way where blood sugar is absolutely stable. I would suggest actually testing blood sugar if they have access to a continuous glucose monitor, CGM, and then just watching how does blood sugar impact, how does the food they eat impact their blood sugar for a while. Then they start to make the connections for themselves. So blood sugar and adrenal function is something as well. And the other aspect, because I mentioned adrenal function, Avan, is that people who have sleep issues, who have dysfunctional adrenal rhythm, they're a bit extra sensitive to stress. So I've asked this question to several people: do you lose sleep even after you get good news in the evening? And they've all said yes, because the adrenals doesn't seem to recognize the difference between news that is stressful and hurting you and news that is exciting, because both those are triggering adrenal spikes. So if you're sensitive to sleep, if you keep your phone on and at 7 in the evening you get some very exciting news, you've ruined your sleep that night. So I'd say just disconnect from everything, good, bad, ugly, everything. Just shut out the world in the evening as early as you can manage, so that you have no access to this kind of stimuli. So that is the other aspect, blood sugar and adrenal function. And then, of course, it has to do with have you had exercise through that day? So if you can find a way to get your exercise, remember that if somebody is struggling with sleep, both sleep onset, which is the ability to fall asleep, and sleep maintenance, which is the ability to stay asleep, they are having issues with cortisol's rhythm. So it's helpful to get your morning cortisol elevated with a morning exercise. So even if you don't have a whole load of time in the morning, if you can just maybe jump on a trampoline, anything to get some activity, blood movement, and helping that cortisol to spike in the morning, that does help to slow it down in the evening. So I would say time of your exercise, as I mentioned before, also the nature of your exercise. If you're somebody who's lifting heavy weights as a woman and finding that every night you're losing sleep, then maybe you need to balance it out with a couple of days of something which is more restorative movement, like Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, swimming, something which is more conducive to getting your movement, but at the same time helping you shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So I think exercise type, time of the day, how much you do, because good exercise does release BDNF in the brain-derived neurotropic factor, and that's a lot of research has correlated that it is very, very helpful to sleep. So the other aspect is that, and of course, hormonal rhythm. So that's something we did talk about, the premenopausal women being very sensitive to not maintaining sleep. And that happens because at that age, progesterone crashes. Estrogen also lowers, but progesterone lowers even faster, which makes most women estrogen dominant. So looking at how can you support your hormones in terms of, again, blood sugar rhythm does play a role in hormonal balance, but also how can you get your body to detoxify excess estrogen? Are you having regular bowel movements? Is it enough for you, or maybe do you need to add more soluble fiber, some soaked chia and flax, anything to just help you move things along? And I've seen a lot of people who especially my clients, who always get so irritated with me because I'm asking them to increase their vegetables and fruit for the fiber, and they prioritize the protein, they prioritize the grains, the fats, but then they don't try to reach that 10 to 12 cups of colorful fruits and vegetables, which is really very, very important, because that does help you to detoxify the estrogen. And I find that one of the things I tell women who struggle to eat their vegetables, a stir fry, soup, salad, anything, is at least put a few things together in a juice and drink it with the fiber, which helps you to evacuate that excess estrogen and not be as estrogen dominant. And of course, body temperature and room temperature play a key role in maintaining sleep. So as I said, the body has to have a cooler temperature for you to both fall asleep and stay asleep. So is your room very hot? Is your room a little cooler? And that's why there's recent sleep products like the chili pad, which you put on your mattress, which keeps the body cooler and helps you to stay asleep. And then you'll find, of course, can you tolerate the temperature? So sometimes women who have estrogen dominance, they may find that they feel very hot when maybe their spouse or partner is feeling differently. So how can you cope with that? So is there a way that you can lower that body temperature with, and exercise is very helpful with that, Avan, because when you have exercise in the morning, what happens? You spike the body temperature initially, but then the body tries to attain homeostasis. So then it drops body temperature to a more cooler one. So having an exercise routine is very, very helpful to lower core body temperature. And I think you can also check I think tracking sleep has been something which a lot of people have recently started to incorporate, but there's so many products out there. So which one do you actually choose? Because there's Apple Watch, and then there's tracking Aura Ring. So there's a lot of trackers out there, and there is some thought in the sleep world that sleep is too complex to be actually able to track with a device, because there's so much nuances to it. But tracking your sleep to some extent with a good device like an Aura Ring does help you to make the connection between what has helped you, what has troubled your sleep, and therefore when you start to look at that, you are able to make some changes in the right direction for your individual self, because you're able to get some information which is then guiding you. Even if you don't have a practitioner or someone actually guiding you with that, it can be very, very helpful. So I think tracking can be supportive as well.
But presumably you'd need to be keeping a good diary of other factors like everything you've spoken about, what you've eaten, what exercise you've done, when you've done it. Has something exciting or bad happened?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd need to be
Yes.
tracking everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've wanted an Aura ring myself for ages. I still haven't gotten around to getting one. But so does that tell you things about what phase of sleep you're going in and out of, and that
Yes.
kind of thing? Yeah.
Yes. So it will break up your sleep. It will show you what are the different. So how long? See, typically you got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, which are non-REM, and then you have REM. And typically the deep sleep. So 1 and 2 are considered very light sleep. So they're just the transitionary phases where you're actually going from waking to sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much depth to that. And stage 3 and 4 are more the deep healing phases where your brain recovers, your immune system recovers. And the REM sleep is also something which is very much required for the body to have its full recovery from a good night's sleep. So the tracker does show you, it breaks up your sleep. So you should be having at least about 30 to 40% in deep sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So the tracker helps you to notice if that happens. But again, I have also seen people who struggle with sleep where trackers can become a source of stress to them, that they start to wear that and then they feel more stressed out that they haven't got that sleep, and then they start to go to bed the next night with a feeling of fear, or feeling of they don't want to go to their bed because it's associated with this poor sleep, and eventually the bed becomes a space of stress. So in that case, usually I tell them not to track until they've actually done some work on their physiology and improve that to a certain extent, because you don't want to add to the stress. Poor sleep can be a deep source of stress. So really my heart goes out to people who struggle with that, because especially if you're somebody who has to still get up and get through a full day with work and kids and responsibilities, it can be deeply debilitating.
It's such a negative cycle, isn't it? When people get stressed about not sleeping well and then they don't sleep well
Yes.
because they're stressed, and goes on and on. Yeah, absolutely. And also with the trackers, I mean, if you, not an Aura ring, obviously, but a lot of people wear the watches like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. And, you know, for me, I just think that whole concept of having this device on your wrist, it's got the lights, which you might look at, and as you said, if you're sensitive to any light, that's not going to help. I think there's a whole gamut of potential problems that come up with the trackers as well. So there's good and bad, isn't there?
And I think in terms of what you mentioned now, and some of the watches do have the application that you can turn off the light triggered by hand movement at night. And then that prevents that light from flashing if at all you wake up. So if there's somebody who does want to use a tracker like a watch, there is that option to do that. But as you rightly said, that in fact, in ancient wisdom in yoga, there is a saying that anything which is touching your body, which is magnetic or electric, actually interferes with the energy flow in the body, the prana, the ki. So there's that aspect as well. Do we really want to do that to ourselves? So I would say maybe just being mindful of and you are the best judge, really. So you are going to know whether you had good quality sleep by just how you feel the next day. Do you have the motivation? You have got the energy to keep going? And one of the things that you'll know if you've had a bad night's sleep is not just that you'll feel tired, you'll tend to be more hungry because poor sleep increases ghrelin, the hunger hormone. You'll also not be as motivated. You won't feel like you want to work or do anything. So you can also just go by what you feel.
But so what about the situation where somebody does think they've had enough hours of sleep, they think it's been quite a deep unbroken sleep, and this is usually not just for one night, but they'll think that they sleep pretty well, but yet they wake up feeling unrefreshed. What would be your first go-to with that?
If they've had a night of poor sleep?
No, well, if they think that they're sleeping well, but yet they still feel tired when they get up, basically.
Well, I think that requires looking deeper at physiology, because they might have, see, what do we mean by good sleep? Because it's not about whether you got 8 hours of sleep, which used to be the normal practice, that you get your 8 hours. No, that could be different. So there was a time when I was heading out to work every morning early, and I would get 6 hours, and I would think that was all I needed. But then when I didn't need, COVID happened, and I transitioned into a virtual mode, and I found that when I naturally slept, I needed about 9 to 10 hours of sleep before an alarm woke me up. So it can be very, very different to each individual. So when you think that I slept well, what do we mean by well? That's going to be different for you and me. So let's say you go to bed, you've eaten in a way all day long that blood sugar is very stable. How many hours are you sleeping without you needing to be woken up by an alarm or by the thought that you need to be somewhere? That's going to be what is the indicator of have you had good sleep. It's not about specific hours. Secondly, when you say that if someone has done that, they've woken up only when their body naturally tells them to wake up without any external trigger to wake them up, then the indicator whether they've had a good night's sleep is again to look at, do they feel refreshed? And one more thing, Arvind, is very key, is that when you wake up, you're not typically supposed to feel ready and able to go for a long run within 5 seconds of waking up. No, that's actually not normal. If someone says, I jump out of bed and I get going, that's a sign that you're not actually gone into deep sleep. You've probably been in a hyperadrenal state. So if you wake up, you should need some time where you're just sitting quietly and allowing your body to transition from sleeping to waking. And my son wakes up every morning and he goes and sits on the swing outside our house, and he stares into space for about half an hour, doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't do anything. And after that, he starts to face the world. And it's something like that. We want to just be in that pocket of ourselves and give ourselves some time. So you shouldn't jump out of bed and jump into action. But post that gentle wake up, if you're able to feel refreshed and motivated without needing a caffeine to get you started, that's probably the best indicator of whether you've had good sleep.
Ah, okay, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's so beautiful that your son does that. How good.
Yes.
Yeah. If only more kids would do that instead of looking straight at their phones.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was just going to say on that as well that, research into meditation shows that the ideal time to do that is first thing in the morning. So that's just that perfect start to the day, isn't it? Having a quiet time to turn yourself inwards before you face the outside world.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I know we're coming close to time. So I guess I would love to get from you, just if we can focus a bit on nutrition and what your I guess the key things that you would advise people to do or to not do around nutrition. And again, everybody, we're saying this is a very individual thing, but just as a general rule or some general rules, if you could give us some deeper of what will help people with their sleep as far as what they put on their plates.
Perfect. And do you also want to go a little bit into supplements in this,
Oh, yeah.
Avan? Because
Yeah,
I
sure.
must say that one of the things that I've noticed is that people have a tendency to research on Google and put themselves on various supplements, including one of which is commonly used for even kids is melatonin. And this can actually, melatonin is safe, but it's not something that you should put yourself on without any guidance, because it does have a feedback loop that if you put yourself on melatonin and then your brain is actually going to say we're getting enough melatonin, so let's shut off our natural melatonin. So it's very important to do other things to help release natural melatonin, like cleaning up the circadian rhythm and the light source and supporting your body with the right nutrition before you do that, because that's a common trend I've seen among people, and they put themselves on these high dose melatonin with no guidance, and what happens is it can also trigger very weird dreams. So if you find that you have these psychedelic state of dreaming where all sorts of things are going on, that can actually be associated with melatonin supplements. So I would first say have caution when prescribing any supplement, because just because it's out there in Google doesn't mean it's safe for every single person. So it's important to not do that, I think, as a first step. And my personal practice, Avan, has been more about cleaning up the system than focusing on a specific sleep supplement. So
Right.
even with clients who come to me for poor sleep, I actually finding a specific sleep supplements is my very last step. So it's only when all the other work has been done and the system has been cleaned up that I even consider a sleep supplement. So I would start by saying that you really don't need the fancy sleep supplements if the system is in a state of balance. And then when it comes to nutrition, as I said, my perfect sleep plate begins at breakfast. I would say anybody who's struggling with sleep should consider a few months of removing all sugars. And again, Arvind, this is something very tricky, because you'll have so many people who are, they think they're eating very healthy and then say I don't have any sugar, and then when you see they're having desserts made of dates and honey and jaggery, and then they're not considering those as sugar, they're only looking at white sugar, and all sugar below your neck, your body doesn't recognize whether it's the white sugar or tons of dates and honey. It's still going to create blood sugar chaos. So I would say consider a 2 to 3 month phase of eliminating all sugars and starches in the form of potatoes, in the form of rice, and focusing more on a very low glycemic diet, prioritizing protein, 40% of protein at breakfast, so that you've got stable adrenal function. Having at least 2 to 3 different colored non-starchy vegetables at all the meals if possible, even as snacks, as juices or smoothies or something where you're just increasing that intake of vegetables, and having some healthy fats. But this is a bit tricky because a lot of people with sleep issues struggle with different aspects of liver challenges. So sometimes they're putting themselves on diets like keto diets because it's very popular, and their body is just not able to handle that high level of fat, and then they go into a problem. So I would say that keeping fat to the extent which you're able to actually manage. So if you're having challenges with the liver or struggling with digestion, then keeping your fats more to soaked nuts, a little bit of avocado, some seeds, rather than having these high fat cheeses or high fat coconut creams, which is very common in when people are talking about keto. But again, I must also say that I've found that a lot of people struggling with sleep issues struggle to metabolize dairy. So I would say maybe removing dairy and gluten would be also steps that they must take, because dairy does congest the lymphatic system, and then that's closely associated. So remember, if you're eating dairy and cheese and things which congest the lymphatic system, your requirement for exercise increases, because you're going to need that much more exercise than someone else, because you are contributing to this systemic congestion by eating dairy. So I would say removing dairy would probably be a big thing. And then keeping your diet as diverse as possible. There's no reason for, and here's another trend that I've seen, is that people who have complex health challenges tend to put themselves on therapeutic diets like autoimmune, paleo, and they're not guided by practitioners. So they continue to stay on these diets for 1 to 2 years, which any diet which removes big groups of food for a long time is going to bring deficiency. So if you don't know how to offset the challenges of some diet with the right nutrients, then you're going to run into a problem. So just trying to keep the diet as diverse as possible, or working with the practitioner if needed.
And you did just briefly mention gluten, removing gluten as well. So is there a specific association with that and sleep?
Yes, so gluten, the research, of course, and again, this is a big controversial topic, because in India, most nutritionists would scoff at the gluten removal. There's a lot of nutritionists in India who speak about gluten-free being a scam and a fad diet, and I think I'm probably the only one who talks about removing gluten here. But overall, the research does show that gluten and dairy both contribute to poor digestion, congestion in the lymphatic channel, therefore in the lymph channels as well. So you're going to run into problems with brain health, which then impacts sleep as well. So you want to keep your digestion fairly light. So remember, even if you're struggling with digestive symptoms like gas, bloating, heartburn, they're all going to keep you awake. They're not going to help you have good sleep. So digestion is key to everything. So how can you keep digestion as light as possible? And a lot of people struggle to digest gluten. So my suggestion even to Indian clients who point towards no one else says remove gluten is that just try it. You have no harm. Try it for a period of 2 months. If things improve for you, it's going to be your best answer. There's really nobody, no research, no practitioner, however renowned they are, can tell you this is the only approach. You're going to have to try everything for yourself, and the answer lies in how your body responds and how you feel eventually.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to stop, because that's kind of summed up everything that you have said. So, I mean, certainly we want to encourage people to see practitioners with any of these, ongoing problems that they might have, exactly for the reasons that you've said. Please don't go out and put yourself on supplements, people, and especially diets that you're going to be on for a long time. But so much useful information there, everything from the blue lights to what we should put on our breakfast plate. So I'm really, really grateful, Deepa, that you are able to spend this time and give everybody your wisdom on this topic. So thank you. Is there any last things that you'd like to say to advise people on how to improve their sleep?
I think we covered most of it, Arvind, but I would just say that I'll go back to what I said before, that beyond, there is no magical nutrient for sleep. There is no magical diet for sleep. Remember that everyone has a different set of root causes, and getting to unraveling this mystery and taking the pieces apart and finding the reasons for your sleep should be process with a lot of patience. Don't get frustrated. Don't fall into a trap if somebody tells you this is the only way, and don't listen to anyone who scoffs at your wanting to look deeper at your sleep challenges and tells you something like, I've just been taking a glass of wine and a sleeping pill every night for the last 10 years and I'm absolutely fine, because that's absolutely ridiculous. So if you are someone who believes that sleeping pills are dangerous, you don't want to go down that route, you want to unravel the pieces of why your sleep is poor, have patience, you'll get there. Go step by step, and you will get there. But don't let anybody scoff at your path towards better sleep.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, and that's right. And again, it comes back to what you feel in your body. You are the only person that can really tell how you're feeling and what is working. And there's no magic pill for anything. So that's great. Thank you so much, Deepa. And I know you do consultations by or remotely, Zoom or whatever it is that you use. So can you just remind everyone how they can get in touch with you if they would like to do that?
Sure, Avin. So as you know, I have a whole sleep podcast, which is the Sleep Whisperer podcast, available on all platforms. So first of all, I'd say that's a free resource. So if everyone wants to look for sleep issues, and there's tons of experts, but remember that they're all going to be opposing views. So because we hold space for sleep, we do encourage that people come into it with varied views, and so that's the first step. But if you want to look at working with us, then just look at www.phytothrive.com and just reach out to us, support@phytothrive.com, to set up a call or look deeper at sleep or whatever it is you're having challenges with. And thank you for having me today.
Oh, thanks so much, Deepa. No problems. And I'll put that detail in the show notes, obviously, for everybody if they want to click on a link. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure, Avin.
I'll talk to you again soon.